Welcome to the Kill the Lion podcast. It's me, Cody Clarke. We got an awesome show for you today. We have Jordan Ross here, one half of Doomed Productions. They make awesome, truly independent films on YouTube, release them for free, really good stuff. And if you like this conversation with him, check out the next episode with Ethan Hansen, the other half of Doomed Productions. We're putting both these episodes up at the same time, kind of a double episode, sister episode kind of thing. So if you like one, definitely check out the other. As always, if you like the show, if you like the studio Kill the Lion films, support us at $2 per month at killthelionfilms.com. That's all it takes to keep us afloat, making podcasts, making feature-length films. It's what we do. It's what you love. Check us out and check out this episode. All right, Jordan, good to talk to you.
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is our first actual conversation of hearing our voices and all that. That's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I hope it goes well.
I think it will. So, Doomed Productions, okay? Right off the bat, Doomed Productions. Is that referring to anything specifically? Because I know that, you had some trouble getting something together, a film that you were trying to make, which led to you making Oh Brother. What can you tell me about Doomed Productions? Was that life imitating art, or was that in response to something that happened? I'm curious.
Yeah, so for the longest time, we were Caramel Shark Productions. Like, that was what we started in high school. That was the name of our channel. And that's just what we went by. And this last year in fall, we sat down and we were looking at kind of making a logo. And we were kind of describing the logo, like what we wanted it to represent to our friend who was doing the logo. And then when we were discussing like what the logo should be, we kind of came to the realization that our name doesn't fit what we want our brand to be, or like what our movies will be going forward. So then we were like, okay, let's change the name. And so then we just kind of took a look at a bunch of films we've done, the kind of stuff we're interested in. And we had a movie called Doom on the Doorstep, which came out last fall. And we kind of liked that. We kind of liked the funniness of a doomed production, because it kind of hints at that horror kind of genre aspect of the movies we make. But it also is funny, because if our movies suck, we can just be like, well, it was a doomed production. So that's kind of the way it came about.
So any significance to the Caramel Shark name?
So this is in high school. This is so stupid. When Ethan, the other half of Doom Productions, his old YouTube channel was Where Shark One. And when I was in school, I had a buddy who would call me Caramel Thunder. So we just combined those two, and that's where we got that name.
So no Where Thunder.
No, but that would have been good. That should have been another channel we started.
I like Caramel Shark. It's catchy. It sounds vaguely tasty. It's a strange push together of two words. I like Doom Productions too as well. I should say it's one of those names where you get a little jealous, where you're like, oh man, that's perfect. For a studio starting out, putting out content, you kind of want to lean into whatever people's complaint is going to be. Mm-hmm. Any hater you might have, you just want to be able to say, well, we're Doomed Productions.
Yeah, just own it. We were shocked, because when we came up with the name, we were like, oh, I bet someone took this. And then we looked up, and surprisingly, there were a couple small channels here and there that had Doom Productions as a name, but there was no one big thing. Like when you searched Doom Productions, nothing like significant came up. So we're like, screw it, let's steal it.
Yeah, that's always a good sign. I'm definitely jealous, by the way, that you used October, because that's like, it's like so perfect. It's like it was like hiding in plain sight. I can't think of another movie called October. There may very well be other movies called October, but everyone always focuses on Halloween. Mm-hmm. And October is a great name for a movie. That's one you guys worked on together. You didn't do that one alone, right?
Yeah, that was the two of us. Yeah.
So that followed Oh Brother. What was it that you were trying to make like beforehand? Am I misremembering that, or was that like kind of like thwarted by COVID or something?
Yeah, no, you're right. We for the longest time, this is kind of getting back to like I guess, this new movement of filmmaking that all of us are in. You know, we all have different names for it. I think Dan Lotz calls it folk filmmaking. But before I kind of discovered like you and Joel and Dan and everybody, we were kind of doing things very traditionally, and that was kind of the way we were making movies. Then once COVID hit, so we did have a movie planned, and once COVID hit, all the plans fell through. I mean, it was all storyboarded, it was scheduled, it was ready to go, and we just couldn't do it during the pandemic. And so after, like, you know, in that weird like quarantine state where you're just bored, you're just watching random stuff, you're not really doing anything. At some point, I kind of discovered into this little circle of YouTube filmmakers and like super low budget filmmakers. So then that's when we got the idea of like, hey, I'm stuck in. So at the time, I was in a different city than Ethan, and I was like, okay, I'll make a movie in Eugene, Oregon. You'll make a movie in Portland, Oregon, and then when I move back up, we'll make another movie together. And that was kind of the idea.
So you're off making Oh Brother. He's making House at the exact same time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm sure he'll go into it, but my making Oh Brother for me was a very kind of straightforward, simple process, fairly simple. But I know his project had a lot of ups and downs, and that's a whole interesting journey that mine just didn't have. But yeah, he's got some good stories with making House.
Oh Brother seems to me like a very personal film. It feels like the family stuff comes from a real place. You know, I don't even know if you have a brother or not, but it feels grounded in something that would be relatable for a lot of people that are watching. I think it's a great film, and I think especially because you did it yourself, it's just like, man, it just feels like it can come from a deeper place from you than it could if it were a collaboration or if a lot of other people were coming into the project and bringing their own stuff. It kind of reminded me of when I made my first film, Shredder. You know, I would never call it an autobiographical film, but I was definitely drawing from a lot of memories of like being a senior in high school that felt very real for me. How much were you drawing from your own life when you put together Oh Brother?
I mean, I think one of the best screenings we had, or not even, it wasn't even a screening. I showed it to my family, and I don't have a brother. I have two sisters, and there were parts of it where they were like dying laughing, where I knew that like it was funny to them because it's like an inside joke with our family, but it wasn't fun. I didn't think it'd be funny to anybody else or any particular part. Like the bit where we're like arguing, I think for the first time, and I storm into my room, and then I come out, and the other brother's sitting there with like all this different food and just eating. Like that is such a thing that one of my sister will do. Like she'll just like be at the counter. You'll just find her eating just like that when she's angry. And it's absolutely hilarious. So we thought it was hysterical, but that was one of those things where I was like, gee, I mean, I don't think anyone else will find this really funny, but like, I'll just put it in just because. But I mean, it was kind of like that, you know, the write what you know kind of thing when I was making the script, because it was just like, well, I'll just take stuff from my own siblings and my own family, because that was, I mean, rather than make up some some artificial kind of fake thing, it just felt more natural to draw from, you know, real family stuff.
So do you have a lot of experience with clogged toilets? Is that what you're trying to say?
Unfortunately, yeah. Yeah, I think it's a family curse, unfortunately. Yeah. So
one of the things that you guys focus on a lot is aspect ratio, and you make some really interesting choices with aspect ratio, particularly in Oh Brother. You know, we're used to very specific aspect ratios in life. If people grew up watching, you know, 4:3 television, that's, you know, what they think of as television, and of course a later generation 16:9 is just television. What are your thoughts on completely kind of like alternative aspect ratios? Because I feel like you use some like weird ratios in Oh Brother that just aren't the usual ratio. And how did you arrive at that?
It's so weird. I think the first time, well, I mean, aspect ratio is one of those things that everybody's kind of aware of, or I mean subconsciously anyways, whether they are like actively aware of it or not. But I think that I think I was in an experimental film class, and at the same time I was working at this place in Portland called the Film Center where they teach classes and stuff like that. And I was working as a teacher's assistant, and it was a cinematography class. And the teacher I was with, he was saying, technically an aspect ratio can be whatever you want. It's just the shape of your frame. And he gave an example of you could have a circle aspect ratio. And I was like, ooh, that's a good idea. So I took that and I put that in one of my experimental films. And then, ever since then, I've just been kind of experimenting with it. And I've discovered like there's other filmmakers out there who mess with it. And you can get like Chris Nolan is someone who like famously, like he'll switch between IMAX aspect ratio. And that's kind of like the popcorn Hollywood version of, I guess, and it's funny because that's not even very extreme to me, but people will freak out over like, oh my gosh, why does when you're watching Batman, why does it switch from full screen to widescreen? And that's a whole lot. But then there's a guy named Noah Hawley who did the TV show Legion and Fargo, and he did a movie called Lucy in the Sky, and he uses aspect ratio a whole bunch, and that's where I get a lot of my kind of inspiration and ideas from, because he's kind of just using it, and it's very natural when he does it because he's just using it as a tool, like color, like lighting, like costumes, all that kind of stuff. It's just kind of, it feels very natural and organic to just, for any visual medium, you wouldn't, I think I've said this before, but, paintings and comic books can be whatever shape they want. And for the longest time, movies have had just, there's only a set like handful of aspect ratios that people use. And if you break outside of that, it's kind of a little weird. And I guess that makes sense if you're showing stuff in a theater. But if it's at home, if it's on YouTube, if it's streaming, where you don't have to worry about theaters messing up your projection, you don't have to worry about the size at all. You can make it 1x1, you can make it 1x2, you can make it whatever weird size or shape you want, because it's just going to be presenting your movie as it is. So I think that's one of those things where YouTube and the online kind of distribution really helps you out as a filmmaker, is because you can experiment with aspect ratio in that way.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, especially the idea of projection and viewing YouTube as projection. I have issues with YouTube as far as the compression that they use on some of the stuff you upload. But in general, you are getting a better quote unquote projection when you release on YouTube than you are in theaters. I've screened my movies in theaters, and it's it spans the gamut of like, sometimes you get just really horrible projections, sometimes you get really good stuff, and you just can't really even judge based off like, oh, this is a crappy, like dingy theater. Oh, this is like a state-of-the-art theater. Like it's just all over the place. Projection in general has gotten really horrible since the advent of digital projection. It has so much potential, but it has a lot of unrealized potential. It was more of an art form, I believe, when it was film projection. How do you feel about compression in general? As somebody who releases to YouTube, maybe Vimeo as well, I'm not sure, but what are your thoughts on the way that you control your image to a certain extent, and then once you upload it, suddenly it's in the hands of some algorithm trying to make sense of how to compress your images?
Oh man, it sucks. It sucks, and unfortunately there's not a lot that you can really do about it in terms of YouTube. Like, I suppose if you got everyone together and you just like sent a mass email and spammed to YouTube's inbox, be like, hey, change your compression settings and all that kind of stuff, that might make a difference. But that's one of those things where I kind of feel like, having a little pixely image, that doesn't bother me so much. I think it's fine because, I've watched movies on my phone. I've watched them on crappy TVs. I've watched them wherever. And a good movie will play on whatever you're looking at. As long as, it's not like totally like blurred out pixelated. I think how it is okay. They could do a lot better, but, we'll see how that progresses in the future and all that. But it kind of feels like out of my hands, you know what I mean? Like there's not a whole lot I can personally do about it other than just be aware of that when I'm making my movie, like be aware of the colors and the color correction and making the visuals for YouTube in mind.
So Oh Brother is in black and white. October's in color. What made you choose black and white for Oh Brother? What made you choose color for October? What went into that decision process for you?
For Oh Brother, it was totally technical because I knew that I would be playing two characters in the same frame, and that's a pain in the butt to, like, when you have to split your image in half and match not only lighting but the colors as well. I knew if I just made it black and white, that would be one less thing for me to worry about. So that was just purely a technical thing. And then for October, I really wanted, I mean, that's a really kind of, it was more about an aesthetic experience. And so much of Halloween is, to me, is like those oranges, those yellows, those kind of, those bright colors alongside really kind of dark blacks. So for that, it was really based on like, well, I know the presence of orange and yellow and all that kind of stuff. I really wanted that in the movie. And that's really where that came from for October.
So with Oh Brother, that was my guess, was that it was technically based as far as it being so much easier. When I did my first film, Shredder, it was definitely a choice of, I just did not like the color look of the video grain that I was getting, because I wanted to do everything natural light, just whatever was available. And, when I was using very high ISOs, I just did not like the look of it in color. Whereas when I was looking at it in black and white, it just looked like grainy 16 millimeter to me. It had a similar vibe to that. And I feel like sometimes people, just watch movies, maybe don't make movies. They assume that sometimes there's these grand artistic choices, but a lot of it does come down to technical aspects and making sure that the film is able to work on some level that people can get down with. When you made Oh Brother, a lot of the music choices were pretty interesting. I can you expound upon that, because that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, so there's one song that, well, actually there's two songs, I think. It's been a while since I've seen it. The songs I remember are from Cambodia, and that's where my family's from. And if anyone knows about like Cambodia, you know that there was a huge genocide there where essentially all of the musicians, all the artists, all the filmmakers, they were just wiped out completely. So prior to that genocide, there wasn't a lot, as far as I'm aware, copyright law was next to none. And after the genocide, it's pretty much non-existent. So it's work where technically you could use it in an ad, and I think you'd probably be fine, because no one owns the rights, because some of the songs, they can't even identify who's on it or who recorded it. Now, there have been cases of, like the guy specifically used, Sin Sisamouth. His family, I think they were awarded the rights to, I think, 68 of his songs, but he honestly recorded into the thousands. Like, he recorded more songs than the Beatles in his lifetime. So it's only a small percentage. And that's a very rare thing. Most artists in Cambodia, at least from back then, in the golden rock and roll age, those rights are really up in the air. And if I was getting paid to make a movie, or if I was making money off of the movie, something does feel a little, I guess, gross about taking music from a horrible situation and just using it just because of copyright. But it's music that I genuinely enjoy and I love, and I want to share with the world, because I think more people should be exposed to it. And I wasn't getting paid for the movie. And I was like, you know what? I want to share this. This is good music. This is good art that the world just kind of isn't that aware of. So I put it in the movie because I just wanted to honestly just share that part of my culture and my heritage and all that stuff. That's really where it came from. But it just happened to work out that, you don't really need the rights to use it. Pretty much. You don't need licensing rights.
Yeah, it was all news to me. I did not know that aspect of the ownership and it being hard to track down. And I really liked the music in the film. I thought it worked. And I also think, as somebody who releases to YouTube, what are your thoughts on using copyrighted music? Because I know, some of the guys we know, they'll just put whatever song they want in there, because YouTube is just gonna, current incarnation of YouTube is totally fine with it and isn't going to take your movie down like they would back in the day. Do you feel inclined to use music that you don't have the rights to because you're releasing it on YouTube? Do you try and protect your films for the future? That's kind of my approach, is like I care about physical releases and all that stuff. So I try and avoid that kind of thing as much as possible. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's funny. Like, it's a funny time to ask it because I'm with you generally. Is I like to use stuff that I know I won't get in trouble if I use. I liked it to be like either all mine or stuff that I know I can legally put in the movie and sell and make a profit of. Also, because I like composing and like making my own stuff, so I try to do that when I can, and it just kind of makes the film feel more. I mean, I guess it gives you more ownership over the movie in a weird way. Try not to sound like egotistical or anything, but like this is all mine kind of thing. But like, it is nice to be like everything in this movie, like we made and we created, and we could sell it if we wanted to, or we could screen it at a festival if we wanted to. There's something nice in that, but I know that there's like specifically on YouTube, like it because it doesn't. This current version of YouTube, it doesn't matter if you put like a Lady Gaga song or whatever in your movie. So the feature we're ramping up to do, I know there's going to be at least one song that is we don't own it. It's like a popular song from a band and everything, and so we're going to put that in, but because we know like, hey, let's just, why not? Because this song speaks to this thing, we think it's right for the project. So we'll just do it this once. I mean, again, it's something I try not to do very often, and I haven't really done in years and years and years since high school. But it's one of those nice things about YouTube where, I think way back when I first started out, YouTube would remove your movie or remove the sound if you used copyright stuff. But now that they have the owners of the song monetize it or whatever, put ads or whatever, like it's kind of a nice workaround in a way for if you really want to use music that you don't own.
Yeah, it's a lot more fair these days. I've been doing YouTube stuff since like around 2009. I think I got on there, and then I left for a while because I got sick of just the culture on there, just the vibes of people, and also the fact that like, I do some like comedy thing, and like I would use some track that like I thought was public domain, because sometimes you go on those websites where it like lists like, oh, here are the songs that are free to use. And then you find out that the information isn't like entirely accurate, or you get false claims on stuff. It was just a really annoying time period. But I feel like now, like YouTube is a little bit of a better place. It seems like, particularly Joel Haver's success, like Joel, as you know, is the sweetest guy in the world. And, he's able to find the success where like, I feel like a couple years ago, the thing to be on YouTube was to be very cynical and very almost troll-esque in your content. And then you would have like millions of hits or whatever. And that's what pushed me away from YouTube. But now, like nowadays, like I'm totally content throwing my movies up on YouTube. I feel like it's just a different vibe. But what do you think about where YouTube is right now as far as just its energy?
I love it. I think it's great. I think I think you're right. I think there was a real cynical side of YouTube and what was getting popular. I mean, it felt like I remember way back in the day where it was like before all the advertisements and all the corporations got into YouTube. Like it felt like a real it was something special, and then it became very like branded and it felt not that different than television, honestly. So to see someone like Joel make it big, that gives me hope in like where YouTube is going. And I think, the pandemic really kind of helped out. Like, I think me personally, but maybe other people, like, oh, YouTube can be for long form content. Because before that, in my head, people only watch YouTube videos that are, 5 to 10 minutes or so. I don't think that's true anymore. I think Joel's feature films, like all of the feature films that I've been seeing on there, it's like, wow, I never would have thought that I would be going YouTube to watch more movies than I would be going to Netflix or something like that. Because it's just more interesting than what's on a lot of those streaming services, which is kind of cool that it's this direct link right to the filmmakers who are making interesting work, all long form content, and it's finding its audience on YouTube. And I think that's awesome.
Yeah, since I've put like about half my filmography up on YouTube, it's reaching people that just would never have watched it if it were on Amazon. They just don't have Prime or, whatever reason, it's reaching new people, and the response has been great. I'm happy with that, and I'm happy that, new people get to see my work. So it's an exciting time, and I'm kind of glad to be back on YouTube now, which is something I wouldn't have thought I would be back on a couple years ago. I thought I was just kind of like, it felt like going back to like your old middle school or high school or something. Like I felt like, oh, I've done that YouTube thing. I don't need to be back there. Like I'm past that. But like, no, it's good again. It's interesting again for sure.
Yeah. When are you going to put Ramekin on there? Or are you? Because that's my absolute favorite of yours.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm doing an alternate cut of Ramekin, which is I'm resurrecting some of the original audio that was recorded on set. So one of the common complaints about that movie is some people like the dub, some people absolutely can't stand the dub. I did the dub for stylistic, weird me reasons, but it's such a good movie that I want like people that would like it otherwise to have a version that they can like stomach for whatever, because some people like they just see the dub and they just can't get into it. Fine, whatever. I like weird Italian movies with dubs. I like all sorts of, weird content with dubs. But I was like, if I'm going to put it on YouTube, why don't I just stick up the dub version and the, resurrected audio version, and then anybody can, watch it and be happy with it. And I'm sure they'll complain about something else at that point, certain people you cannot, I'm not trying to please anybody that want to hate me regardless, but I do want to just like create something a little bit different with it for that reason. So that'll go up soon. The only ones I'm not going to put up on YouTube are ones with like, explicit nudity or anything, just because I don't think YouTube is even entirely sure what their specific rules are about that, but I also feel like that kind of stuff should be behind some sort of paywall so that people take it seriously, so I don't get like the people that like will comment just like the time code of the nudity, and that'll get like 1,000 like, thumbs up and just be stuck at the top there. Like I don't want to have to deal with that stupid shit. So that's the line I'm drawing. But anything without that kind of stuff, I'm just going to put up there and have some new life breathed into it. So, you mentioned you liked Ramekin. Was that a little bit of an influence on October? Because I feel like that has that innocent quality to it as well that I was trying to tap into. I was trying to resurrect horror from non-innocence, and because I grew up on horror that like kids could watch and could sit down with and not have to close their eyes every couple minutes. I'll watch the extreme horror stuff too. Some of that stuff is great, but I hate that horror has become associated with like who can scare you the most, who can gross you out the most, who can jump scare you the most. That should never be what horror only is. And I like that you made a more innocent kind of goosebumpsy kind of horror. So it was when you saw Ramekin, did that kind of inspire that? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm just curious the genesis of October.
I think with that, I think it was a subconscious influence because I wasn't thinking about it. And then when I think it was either editing or doing shooting, one of those two, we did them back to back pretty much. It was all the pumpkin stuff. And I was like, you know what? This kind of reminds me of Ramekin a little bit. So I'm totally sure that was like a subconscious thing of that like innocent PG type horror movie. But that was kind of the idea. I mean, the whole genesis behind October was like, when you think about what you watch during October or like Halloween season, I mean, there's only like a handful of great Halloween movies, right? There's like Halloween, there's like Trick or Treat, there's a couple of Disney Channel movies, right? But there's not a lot of like, it's mostly horror movies. And what does The Shining have to do with Halloween? Absolutely nothing. What does Nightmare on Elm Street have to do with Halloween? Nothing. It's this weird balance of like, whenever I'm trying to curate like a playlist of what to watch on Halloween, there's so few movies that check all the boxes of like, one, being set around or on Halloween, two, kind of having Halloween vibes, because that's a thing. There's movies that are set on Halloween, but that don't feel Halloween-y at all. And then there's other movies that are just like, have nothing to do with Halloween, but kind of feel Halloween-y. And so October is going to be the first of 31 planned films where it's like, each one is like about Halloween in some shape or form, and it feels Halloweeny. That's kind of the idea behind the project.
So 31 films. Do you have a timeline for this? Do you have any of them figured out? Is this a life's work? Is this something you're going to bang out over the weekend? What's 31 films? Are they all feature length? Are they some of them shorts? I'm very intrigued.
Yeah, it's probably going to be a long time. Right now, I think at the very slowest, it would be one feature film for the next 30 years. Well, if you take out October, if you don't count like that year, that's one out of 31. So for the next, I can't do math. 2051, one movie a year until then. That's Halloweeny. Yeah.
That's awesome. I love the commitment to that, because then it becomes kind of like an advent calendar where like you can watch one every day of October and then end up on, whatever your favorite one is or whatever. That's a really interesting concept, because we make the kind of movies that we make and we have the freedom involved. I dream of like, making a movie in every single state of the US, or making a movie every month of a particular year, or coming up with a movie at like 6 a.m. and by the time it's like 6 a.m. the next day, having like a finished movie, that kind of thing. It's a really cool aspect of the kind of truly independent stuff that we do. What do you think you gain from like, because people always think of like, oh, I can't make like the next, huge blockbuster. But what kind of stuff do you think is great about the freedom that you have to make your smaller films?
Yeah, just the more that you think about it, and this is what me and Ethan, we felt this all throughout film school, and we kind of felt this after film school. And just being a part of this kind of movement has really helped us cement this idea. But like, I don't want to be on a set necessarily where it's a set job and there's the grips and there's the DP and there's the first AD and then, there's all those separated jobs. To me, when you are starting out, at least, that's so much work. Like that creates so much unnecessary work when it's just like a group of 5 friends and you're trying to replicate a big Hollywood set. Like that's completely redundant. It just doesn't make sense to me. I did a film in film school where I shot it for like a friend, and I was just acting in it. But it was like a 2-page scene, or maybe it was just 1 page, and it was a very simple kind of comedic thing. And I'm not even joking. I think it took like 8 hours to shoot. And after that, I was like, geez, like if that was me and Ethan, we could have shot that in like an hour, 30 minutes even. So there's so many specifics. And I think you and Dan, or it might have been you and Joel in your other podcast, you guys kind of went over it, of just like the ridiculousness of like those sets. And those sets are great if you're into like the industry of filmmaking. But if you're kind of if you just want to make art with your friends and if you just want to create, it gives you a lot more freedom. And I think, just so I'm not repeating anything you guys all said, but like another thing to think about when it comes to sets and roles and all that kind of stuff and the freedom you have is like money, right? So if you have money to make a movie, you would think that having more money is good, right? Well, it's tricky because say you want to hire an actor or an actress or whoever to play a role. Are they union or are they non-union? If they are union, you have to pay them certain things. Or if you're renting a location, you have to think about like insurance and paying that. There's just all these kind of complications and red tape that come up with money, which are good for big, huge productions, but they exist to like, you will not thrive in them as an independent production or a small production. That's why money gets eaten up really quickly on small projects, because they're trying to emulate big movies with getting permits and paying everybody at set rates and all that kind of stuff, which again, it's good on specific projects. But when you're a small independent kind of thing, it really slows you down, and it's going to eat all your money, and you're just going to spend the whole time trying to navigate red tape and like legal paperwork, which, let's be honest, no one gets into films to do that. You just want to make a movie. So just grab a camera with your friends and you can do whatever you want. We filmed, I don't recommend this at all. Don't do this, but there were train tracks near our house, right, where we were filming. And so we filmed there multiple times, and eventually we got stopped by a cop who was like, hey, you can't be there. And we're like, oops, sorry, we didn't know that. And we left. But that's one of those things where if we had wanted to shoot on those train tracks, it would have been we couldn't. We flat out we would not have been able to do that if we were working with money and a budget and kind of all that stuff. But if you're just a small crew of people, go out and you can shoot wherever you want, pretty much. Just, I don't recommend train tracks. That's really stupid because, you might get killed or something. But, you have so much more freedom as someone with no money than you do with lots of money. And I don't think that's something that people realize until, you get further into your filmmaking career.
Yeah, it's the classic thing of mo money, mo problems. It's you can have all the money in the world, but it's always going to be somebody else's money. If somebody's giving you that much money to make a film, they're going to want it done the quote unquote proper way, and that's going to entail a lot of stuff that really gets in the way of the creative process. So when you're coming up with one of your smaller films, are you somebody who writes a lot? Are you somebody who improvises a lot? I know there's a lot more freedom. I know Joel Haver, famous for he doesn't write a thing. He just wants to get out there and start improvising. I'm more a writer type. I like to, write out the screenplay, do a couple drafts, make it very honed. What's your process right as far as writing?
I'm a writer too, so I like to. Now, this hasn't been the case with Oh Brother or October necessarily, but in my ideal world, I like to write a couple drafts, perfect the script as much as I can, and then I storyboard. And I did do this with October, where essentially I have a journal and I board each shot and each cut. So it's not simply as writing down, oh, we'll get a shot, a reverse shot, and a master. No, I like for each line of dialogue that's spoken or each moment, I board out what it's going to look like. And and I do that for two reasons. One, I'm a visual person. It's just easier for me to visualize the movie that way when I see where each cut will be and what each shot will be. But also, it makes editing go a whole lot smoother when I just have the blueprint right there. So it's kind of like a comic book of the movie, essentially, before the movie. So that's kind of how I do it. So it's a lot more planned out and organized. But that's not to say that we don't improvise. Because I think for at least us, or for me, when it's everything is so detailed and planned out, then I feel like now I can kind of throw lines out here and there because I know the story inside and out.
Yeah, that's similar for me. Most of my improvising, it'll happen in rehearsal, and then I'll take a couple notes of like, oh man, that would be really good to stick in, or maybe it's not, the scene is like A, B, C, and maybe it should be B, A, C as far as like the beats that we're hitting just based off rehearsal or whatever. As far as your shoots, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask you real quick, how much of Mute Date was improvised? Because for a lot they're not speaking for like hardly any of that. So they could be doing whatever and the narration could be whatever it wants. So how much of that was scripted and how much of that was improvised?
It was pretty much 100% scripted, and I was basically standing behind the camera yelling the entire script at the actors, and they were just reacting based off. I mean, they knew the dialogue ahead of time. They kind of had it like mostly memorized, but I was just yelling it at them, and like a couple seconds of there would be like a split second difference between their reaction and what I was yelling, but in editing, I could plug in the voiceover wherever I wanted, and it would just line up perfectly with what they were doing.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that was like total, like that whole movie just came about because of technical limitations. Like I was using sci-fi to cover up for the fact that I had no viable way to record good audio as far as like a movie that was set on a first date. Like My initial idea, was something very bare bones. It was just my friend Anthony, who I just wanted to put as a lead in a movie. I just wanted to put him on like a first date and just do like one of those movies where like, two people are just going on a first date in New York City. And it was definitely a more urban idea. It was less like, the greenery and whatnot. The initial idea was more like cars and things whizzing by and all that. And there was just no way I was going to get really good audio that way. It would just be so difficult that it would become most of my focus, whereas I wanted to be focusing on the visuals. So I was like, well, I just did dubbing for for Ramekin, I was like, well, I could do dubbing again, and wouldn't it be great if I didn't have to line it up with the lips, because then there's so much freedom there. So then it was just, all right, what's a science fiction version of that? You know, what could I do there? And then Mute Date essentially wrote itself once I had that prompt, once I had that idea, and it became this thing where, yeah, you could plug in whatever you want into that movie. I'm sure I could release a version where people could stick in their own voices and do a completely different movie. And it was a great little hack, you know, like I feel like, you know, the kind of movies we're making, we're always looking for what we can get away with and what we can, you know, do to make our limitations just completely invisible or play into them in some capacity.
Yeah. Well, Mute Date, that's such a great example of like a clever sci-fi premise that Hollywood would spend billions of dollars trying to like get that made, and like it would have been so like cluttered and unnecessary, but it's like you don't need all that. You just camera, two people, and they're just talking, and it's all dubbed, and like that's a brilliant sci-fi concept right there. That's such like, to me, that's like one of those like, oh my gosh, why didn't anyone think of this before? That's such a smart way to like fun, like it's like a mix of like Before Sunset trilogy with like a small sci-fi kind of twist.
Yeah, that's I mean, my favorite sci-fi is the sci-fi that happens in your head, you know, the sci-fi that you envision. I would rather, not that I really do that often, but I'd rather sit down with a sci-fi book and see what kind of images come into my head rather than sit in front of a sci-fi movie. And as I say that, I realize that like I very rarely read sci-fi novels. I mostly watch sci-fi movies, but in my perfect like version of that, it's something like Mute Date, and that's why I'm less satisfied by science fiction movies as I could be, because I want people talking about stuff. Like I remember there was that movie, The Man Who Fell to Earth, or Man Who Came to
Mm-hmm.
Earth.
Yeah, with Keanu Reeves, right?
No, it was oh man, it was a bunch of no name, like, you know, Hollywood but not like well known actors. And it was that there was this guy that was like immortal, and he was sitting down all his friends at like a cabin and explaining to them like, oh, I'm immortal. Here's everything that's been going on with me in my life. And it's just a movie where people are talking. It never cuts away to like him as a caveman or him as whatever. It's all just happening in your head as you're watching the movie. It's basically a filmed play. I didn't particularly care for the movie. I thought the acting was horrible. I thought the production quality was just like so abysmal. But I love the fact of a sci-fi movie where it's just people talking and it happening in your head. And that's something I definitely took with me and probably fueled Mute Date in some capacity of like, all right, well, what's more interesting than like an interesting conversation, and then getting to carry that with you for the rest of your life and kind of envision some world because of that.
Yeah, no, and that's another thing where it's like you would think as a small independent production, like you can't touch genre. I mean, most people I went to film school with, a lot of them were just like, oh, I'm just going to do dramas, and they're all like talking head stuff. And that's great, but it's fun to have like genre films, and there's like smart, clever ways you can do it without a budget.
Yeah, there's room for genre films that are, you know, basically, you know, a talking head movie. It's just that the talking is very visually persuasive and puts images in your head and makes you think of concepts. You could definitely go so many places if you start breaking out into that kind of thing. And I hope that, like, you know, I know that a lot of people listen to this show are filmmakers themselves or want to start making films or are interested in this kind of movement that's going on. I hope that, you know, one of the things they take away from, you know, this episode and in general is that, you know, your limitations, you might think it's like, oh, the camera you have, or oh, the boom you have, or whatever. Your limitations are mostly just yourself and what you envision for what you are capable of doing or what the story is capable of being. The most limitations you'll ever have in life are the ones that you place on yourself that have nothing to do with money, technical aspects, whatever. It's, you know, how much are you going to box in your creativity, and how much are you going to let yourself come up with these ideas that you would never come up with in a million years if you had millions of dollars to work with? Like nobody is going to sit down and come up with Mute Date in the same way, or Ramekin, or October, or Oh Brother. Like, somebody watching Oh Brother can be like, oh, that's kind of like the adaptation thing where, like, there's two Nicolas Cages or whatever. But adaptation is not this personal piece that like feels very familiar, even if you haven't dealt with those specific family things. Like that, it doesn't have that grounding, and it also doesn't have that homegrown quality of like one person is doing all of this, and that's like magic on a level that Hollywood can't even touch, man. Like they can't do what we do, even if they wanted to. It would just be so much in the way. It's like they can only do, Siegfried and Roy stage magic. They can't do like the David Blaine kind of like street magic that happens like a couple feet from your face and it's like on a busy street corner and all that. They can't do that. And that's the more compelling stuff, and will always be the more compelling stuff, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, then again, they'll spend millions of dollars trying to replicate reality, but it's like they never will be able to succeed in that. It's like, I feel like Hollywood is best when it's like big popcorn budget nonsense. And I love that stuff. I love all movies. And I love like going to the theater and like watching CGI, art or CGI like monsters and everything like that. I love that stuff. But when Hollywood tries to do like more personal stuff like that, sometimes it's okay, sometimes it's not. And I think that's a sweet spot for a lot of young, no budget, independent artists, where you can do something Hollywood can't. There's a lot of stuff you can do that Hollywood just cannot do. And once you discover that and you discover your voice, you're gonna hit the ground running pretty much.
Yeah, I loved Sonic the Hedgehog from last year. That was like my favorite movie of last year. And I love the, popcorn stuff as well. It's just that like, it has to be that. It will always be stuck as that. I can't make a Sonic movie, but they can't do what I do, so we're even, And
Yeah.
I would always rather be doing what I'm doing, so I'm happy, I don't have to work with all the great actors that I would necessarily want to work with. I'm fine with being just fans of Daniel Day-Lewis or, whoever else. I don't necessarily need to work with these people. For me, the stars are like the people that are in my movies. Those are movie stars for me. Like I'm such big fans of anyone I cast. I'm casting them because I think they're the best person possible for this role, this film, whatever. So they're my Daniel Day-Lewis. Like Anthony Capfer in Mute Date. That's because it's exactly what I want. It's a better performance than any Hollywood actor could ever give me, because they'll never be able to be, my friend Anthony, who I like the vibe of and I enjoy. But the idea of like casting people to play people that is just like so stupid and would never occur to us, because we can just cast the people we know. But when you're trying to market a movie, suddenly Liam Neeson's your dad or whatever, and it's just like, well, why would Liam Neeson ever be my dad? Why can't my dad just play my dad or whatever?
Yeah.
It's so silly.
No, I believe anyone can act. I think anyone could be a good actor. They just got to be comfortable, and you have to be a good director, have a good director behind them. You don't need to cast, Meryl Streep or whoever. Like you said, just cast your dad to play your dad, and that'll work out just great.
Yeah, and you're a very good actor, I should say too. You're not just a good filmmaker. Oh Brother is mostly, it's writing on the back of the acting. If you drop the ball there, suddenly that movie's going to become very unwatchable. Like it's resting on the fact that you believe one brother as one brother and the other brother as another brother. Like if we're watching a scene and we're like, I'm not sure what I'm looking at. Is it this brother or is it the other brother? Then suddenly the whole film falls apart. And I like that aspect of the kind of stuff we do, where like it has to succeed in these very specific areas, or it all falls apart. And so like, it's kind of like that theater type thing where like, if a play sucks, then you realize that you're sitting on an uncomfortable chair in a dark room, and you're looking at, people lit by like lights, and suddenly you're out of it. And it's like, oh man, I can't get back into this. We're kind of doing that same thing where like, if we drop the ball as far as the acting or the editing or whatever, it's just going to show more because we don't have all these stupid bells and whistles that Hollywood pays millions of dollars to be able to have, like,
Yeah.
big scores or amazing, like, tracking shots and all these like crazy things and like huge set pieces or whatever. Like, we're the theater guys. And you know what? Historically, actors like that stuff more anyway. All the big actors, they want to take a couple years off and do theater anyway because it's real. It's something tangible where they feel like they're actually being appreciated for what they can actually do. Any big actor always has that period where they take a couple years off and do little plays or whatever. You can be the biggest actor in the world. Nobody can ever give you that real connection to a source material and to an audience like theater can. And I do think that, more and more we're going to see bigger actors as they find out that you and I exist and Joel exists and Dan exists and the list goes on. As they find out that people like us exist, we're going to be the new taking a couple years off to do theater. There's going to be bigger actors that are like, this union hasn't done much for me or anybody anyway. I'll go non-union and do this project because this is the cool stuff that's happening right now as far as writing and filmmaking in general. That's the vibe that I get.
Yeah. I think it's one of those weird things that I didn't even notice until just now. It's like something that all of us have in common in this kind of movement, whatever you want to call it, is we're all actors for the most part, I think.
Yeah.
Because you're in Shredder, you're in Strummer, Dan's in his movies, Joel's in all his stuff, and part of that comes from necessity, but another part of it is like, I don't know, it teaches you to be a better director, and it also like it's just fun to act. It's fun to mess around with your friends and be on camera, and it will make you a better storyteller if you're aware of all that aspect. Even if because I'm sure there've been projects where one of us have been like, oh man, I wish I didn't have to act in this, but I don't have anyone else, so I have to do it. But you do it, and it's actually pretty fun, and it's it'll make you a better creator, a better director, and I think that's a really interesting part of this kind of movement where it's like, oh yeah, you can totally feel the presence of the director in everything because the director is in a lot of it, and they have such a hand in the music and the editing and all that. They're touching every part of this movie. I think that's just another way that we can all be proud that we have ownership over our films. Like, it's all us. This all comes from the heart. This all comes from these movies are so personal and they come from a deep place. And again, that's something that's very hard to replicate in Hollywood. Very often, like, they don't always do that. More often they don't. So it's really impressive that when a film in Hollywood can be made that feels really personal. But that's just something we can just naturally do, that we don't have to have all the money to do it, because that's just what makes us unique. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, it also, acting, as a director, it allows you to direct through the performance that you're giving. So if you're acting opposite somebody and you want to steer the conversation in the area that the scene needs, by how you deliver your lines, you can steer it back to whatever you're trying to do, which is it's this superpower. It's like if you're just watching two actors and you're directing them, you got to wait till the scene is over. If you're in the scene, you can save pretty much anything just by like matching what the person is giving or bringing them back to a certain place that you want it or whatever. It's this like it's a director's dream almost to just be in the scene and be able to control it in that aspect.
Yeah, I can just picture like if Daniel Day-Lewis directed a movie, or Leonardo DiCaprio, they're trying to direct and they were like, you know what, just do it like this, and then they perform the scene and it's amazing. It's like, well, then why don't you just act in it if you like,
Exactly. All right, so we're going to close it out here with a segment. If you've heard the show, it's called Stupid Questions. It's just how we go out and how we leave the show. It's a little bit of a palate cleanser. It just is our thing that we do. And of course, we don't want to keep your boy waiting. We got to have him on the show. We're doing these episodes back to back, people. If you're listening back to back, we're splitting them up, but I'm recording them straight back to back. I know Ethan is waiting in the wings. So we'll do a little couple stupid questions and then we will get out of here. Are you ready for stupid questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. All right. First stupid question. What's the deal with like pie? I feel like pie is in like your movies. It's always like somebody's eating pie or whatever. What's the deal with the pie? What does it represent? Why is it there? Do you love pie? Do you hate cake? Tell me about it.
I never noticed that.
You never
Oh my
noticed
gosh.
that because
No.
I'm telling you, America is noticing it. Okay, it's not just me. We all want to know what the deal is with all the pie in your movies.
In Oh Brother, it was like, I need a good dessert that's easy that I can just buy from the store, and that's why it's in there. In October, I mean, pumpkin pie and Halloween go hand in hand, so I feel like if you make a movie about Halloween and there's no pumpkin pie, I think there's a failure on your part to an extent.
So is this something you're going to keep going now that I've called attention to it? Are you going to feel like a failure if you don't find some way to work pie into everything that you do from now on? Or are you just going to get real self-conscious and be like, oh man, I better not write about pie ever again?
I'm going to try to put a pie in everything I do now that you've mentioned that.
Please do. Now this is a historic episode. Now this is, one for the history books because people can pinpoint the exact moment you realized your deep connection to pie that you did not realized before, and then you just stuck it into everything, all your 31 movies, every movie you make from now on. It's just all about pie.
Yeah. That's great.
All right, one more stupid question. Okay, your name is Jordan, right?
Yes.
That's one of those like cool names that like if you're growing up in like the 90s, like that's one of those names that you wish you had. What was it like having a cool name growing up?
You want to know where it comes from?
Sure.
The New Kids on the Block, the boy band?
Yes, of course.
My mom is a huge fan of the New Kids on the Block.
This is the best possible answer you could have given. This is an amazing answer.
So Jordan Knight that was like her guy in New Kids. So that's why I'm Jordan.
That is awesome. I'm a little bit older than you. I'm just going to tell you, growing up in the 90s, there was no cooler name than like Jordan. That was like you are officially like the leader of like the friend group, or you're the cool kid that everybody looks up to. There were certain names like that. Tommy had that kind of thing too because of the Green Ranger from Mighty Morphin Power Rangers.
Oh, yeah.
Tommy had that power to it, but Jordan had that power. I think Jordan was the Red Ranger now that I think about it. But certain names were just like the cool names growing up. So you had a cool name. Did it benefit you in life, do you think? Do you think people said yes to you because they felt power, because of it? What was it like? I'm jealous because my name's Cody. My name's silly, My name is like, it doesn't have that same coolness to it.
Yeah, but you got it's like I'm so bad at English. What is an alliteration? The
yes,
KK sound? The Cody Clarke.
I love the alliteration. It's great.
I love that though. I think that's pretty cool.
All right. I'll take that. Definitely alliteration growing up. That was something that I had pride in because it feels like you're already established before you even start. It feels like, oh, you're meant to do something because you have the same initials.
Yeah, well, that's like the Stan Lee superhero. Like all of his characters were like alliterations, like Peter Parker, Bruce Banner, Sue Storm. Like they're all alliterations. It's great.
Exactly. He would have loved me.
I think so.
We would have gotten along perfectly well. He would have kicked Kevin Smith to the curb, and I would have been his best buddy.
Yeah. No, Strummer feels very similar to Clerks in a lot of ways. So I think if you'd made that in the 90s, you would have been in with like the comic book crowd and all that.
It's funny because I have no natural pull to any of that stuff. I try sometimes. There's certain comic books I like, but I find that they're not the comic books that a lot of the comic book guys like. Are you big into comics or no?
Huge, yeah. I really love comics.
See, I'll bring up comics that I like, and like it'll just be like crickets, or they'll just be like, yeah, but that's kind of like junky or whatever. Like I like. Are you familiar with Danger Girl?
Yes. I think I've read like a couple issues, but that's it.
Okay, the first run of Danger Girl, the art in those initial Danger Girls is fantastic. By the way, I forget the name of the guy who does it, but he's just I'm so particular about art when it comes to comic books. Like I like Carl Barks. I like the old Donald Duck stuff, the very beautiful stuff in that regard. I like Tintin. I like stuff where I can key into the art. Whereas like a lot of the superhero stuff, it's more about story and like, I'm not talking about like the classic beautiful superhero comics. I'm talking about like the modern stuff. I just cannot pick up like a book that comes out on the shelves today and connect with the art. I just have too much bias towards it. It's just not a good scene. So what do you like as far as comic books? So just before we go, what are your favorites?
So I'm huge into this. I like it all, but I'm huge into superhero stuff. So like Superman's my favorite. Batman, Wonder Woman, any popular superhero, I like them. I like them a lot, but particularly Superman. If I can go with like a weird kind of a little slightly more obscure, it's not that obscure, but like Punk Rock Jesus by Sean Murphy was I think that's a graphic novel that came out last 10 years or so. That's a Vertigo comic that I really like. I love, what's it called? Anything that like Grant Morrison touches. They're a great writer. I love that. Gee, we could have a whole nother episode just talking about comics. It feels like
I'm gonna have to make sure I pick up that comic you mentioned. Was it Punk Rock Jesus?
Punk Rock Jesus, yeah, it's a really interesting sci-fi.
If I put this episode up, they're all gonna shoot up in price, and I won't be able to get my hands on it. I gotta buy a couple before I edit the episode and put it out. That's why I like that these aren't live, and I'm not like live streaming these episodes, because like if I get a nice tip, a nice piece of information like that, I can act upon it. Mm-hmm. I can secure a copy for myself before they start, being like $1,000 on eBay and I can't get my hands on them. So I thank you for the recommendation. All right. So Ethan's sitting there twiddling his thumbs, bored out of his mind.
Yeah.
He wants to get on the horn. We're going to bring him on soon. Thank you, Jordan. This was a wonderful episode, and hopefully you'll come back in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you all for listening. Again, the best way to support the show, KillTheLineFilms.com. $2 per month. It supports the show. It supports the studio. Thank you. See you soon.